Good morning. Today is day 314 of our 365-day journey through the Bible. At the moment, we're looking at those parts of the Jesus story that are unique to St. Matthew's Gospel. And today we're looking at the importance of forgiveness. And this is Matthew chapter 18, verses 23 to 35. So, the kingdom of the heavens is similar to this man, this king, who wanted to audit the accounts of his employees. So he started to do that, and one was brought to him that owed him 10,000 talents, which he was unable to repay. So his boss ordered him to be sold as a slave, along with his wife, his children, and all his property, to recoup the debt. At which the servant got down on his knees and said, "Can't you put your anger aside for a while? I'll get the money for you, all of it." His boss was filled with tenderness, released him, and wrote off the debt. But that same employee, just as he was leaving his boss, bumped into a fellow worker who owed him just 100 denarii. He grabbed him by the throat and said, "Pay up now." His fellow worker fell to his knees and asked him to have patience, and he would get the money, but he refused to wait and had him put in prison until the debt was paid. But his fellow workers saw it all and were very upset. They reported his behaviour to their boss, who sent for him. He said, "I didn't realize what a wicked employee you were. I wrote off your debt entirely when you asked me to. Shouldn't you have been merciful too? Shouldn't you have done the same for your fellow worker as I did for you?" Angrily, his boss handed him over to the prison officers until he paid back all he owed. That is how my Heavenly Father will deal with you unless you learn genuinely to forgive others. Well, we did, back on day 259, we did look at this parable as a story to help us reflect on our own behaviour. Now, we need to clarify one further matter, because this is a story that only appears in Matthew's Gospel. Matthew is wanting to wean former Jews away from their traditional transactional relationship with God to a new relationship that relies on God's grace and forgiveness. So now we shall look at the parable from the point of view of a first-century Jew coming into Christianity with all their Jewish instincts intact. Theirs was a faith that believed your obedience and your good behaviour will win you some merit in God's eyes. Every crime and misdemeanour will have to be paid for by the individual who committed it. They tried to save souls by making people pay for their misdemeanours here on earth, before they fell into the hands of God on Judgment Day. In this case, Jesus is criticizing those of the Jewish faith who are trying to impose the strictest possible restraints and punishments on their fellow Jews, even as they were congratulating themselves that they were in God's good books. He is trying to remind them that they themselves owe everything to God. Beneath this veneer of lawfulness, they actually knew that God had saved his people on countless occasions. Especially they knew that it was their ancestors' sins that caused their exile in Babylon, and it was God, through the intervention of a foreign power no less, that forgave them and returned them to Jerusalem. Little did Matthew's newest converts realize that God was not the kind of harsh judge their traditions envisaged. He was more like the boss in this parable. God is basically tender-hearted. He knows none of us is perfect and takes that into account so long as we trust him. What Matthew is trying to impart to his newly converted Jews is that he expects in return that they will behave towards others as he has behaved towards them. They are to give up their instinctive judgmental attitude towards those who fail. Like God, they too are expected to be tolerant, loving, and forgiving. The standard by which God will judge us, according to this parable, is exactly matched to the standards we impose on others. If we are strict, then God will be strict. If we are considerate and merciful to others, God will be merciful to us. Thus, confusingly, each of us will be judged by a different standard. And the strictest amongst us will protest that this is hardly fair. To be honest, it isn't fair by their standards, but it is more than fair from God's point of view. It redresses the balance between the powerful and the powerless, between the rich and the poor, between snobs and the rest of us, and it shows God's special love and compassion for the poor and uneducated of this world in their raw humanity. It teaches us to be merciful as our Heavenly Father is merciful to us. In the same way, tomorrow, we look again at the parable of the bridesmaids and see how Matthew has tuned it to the same kind of effect. And I'll see you tomorrow.